Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story. President Trump said a trade deal with China could happen within 3 to 4 weeks, and that China has reached out to talk since he raised tariffs to a total of 245%.
I think we're going to make a deal with China. We're going to make a deal with everybody.
A recent report says the mayor of Boston received campaign funds from a person tied to more on what we know so far. President Trump said Thursday that China has reached out to talk ever since he hiked tariffs on China to the current level. Chinese exports to the U.S. now face up to 245% tariffs. He said he believes the U.S. would reach a deal with China and other countries over the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Well, you'd think it was pretty obvious that he has, but we will talk about that soon. It's not that important because, honestly, we're going to have a deal. I believe we're going to have a deal with China. And if we don't, we're going to have a deal anyway because we're going to set a certain target, and that's going to be it.
The comment comes as the U.S. and China remain locked in a tariff showdown. To reduce the trade deficit and bring jobs back home, Trump imposed various tariff rates on different trade partners. Other countries have lined up for negotiations, but China retaliated, raising tariffs on U.S. goods and courting other countries to oppose the U.S. After some back and forth, U.S. exports to China face a 125% reciprocal tariff in addition to other duties. That's while Trump paused reciprocal tariffs on most countries for 90 days. Trump has held tariff talks with Japan, Mexico, and Italy. He said he's going to make a deal with China over the next 3 or 4 weeks.
I think we're going to make a deal with China. We're going to make a deal with everybody. And if we don't make a deal, we'll just set a target, and we'll live with that, and it'll be fine too.
How much time do you think it would have?
I would think over the next 3 or 4 weeks, I think maybe the whole thing could be concluded.
Trump also noted that he's reluctant to keep hiking tariff rates on China because it would discourage people from buying entirely. He said a deal for TikTok to cut ties with its Chinese owner in favor of an American buyer would also be delayed until trade tensions are resolved. Is China attempting to trade funding for sway with U.S. politicians? A recent Daily Caller report flagged hundreds of thousands of dollars in Boston Mayor Michelle Wu's campaign funds as problematic. That's because the person who raised the funds has extensive ties to Beijing's spy agency. The investigation also found this person has been tasked with recruiting U.S.-based talents for Chinese companies. NTD's Flora Hua brings us the story.
Michelle Wu was elected mayor of Boston in 2021, becoming the first Asian woman to hold the title. The Daily Caller found that a Chinese national contributed extensively to Wu's election success. His name is Gary Yu, co-chair of the New England Chinese-American Alliance. The organization claims it raised over $300,000 for Michelle Wu. It also says it hosted fundraisers for at least 9 politicians in Massachusetts, mainly Chinese-American politicians. Digging into Gary's ties to China, Chinese state-run websites revealed 2 nonprofits Yu has are controlled by China's United Front Work Department. The department serves as China's overseas propaganda and intelligence arm. Yu also serves as the overseas chief for a major Chinese headhunting firm. Chinese media reported that Yu recruited talents for a state-run high-tech zone in a southwestern Chinese city. This zone hosts many companies affiliated with China's military, including telecom giant Huawei. Given Yu's extensive China ties, why is he interested in Boston? Boston is home to top U.S. institutes like Harvard, MIT, and Boston University. Last month, Yu flew to China to meet with a Chinese Communist Party official. This official has a Chinese state agency in charge of monitoring Chinese people living overseas and their relatives. According to Chinese media reports, the CCP official tapped Yu with two tasks. One, boost foreign tours to China to court American teenagers, and two, recruit more overseas talents in the artificial intelligence field and bring them back to southern China's Guangxi province. Guangxi is home to a military district. Official reports say the province combines the defense and manufacturing industries together and is working to fortify them with AI technology. It's worth noting this province also provides economic support for neighboring countries, including Vietnam, Malaysia, and Thailand. Flora Hua, NTD News.
The tariff war is bringing the tension between Washington and Beijing to new heights, but zooming in on interactions between U.S. politicians like Michelle Wu and pro-Beijing individuals like Gary Yu, how are their relationships influencing U.S. policymakers and their views on China? To discuss, we sat down with John Mills, retired Army colonel and former director of cybersecurity at the Defense Department. John Mills, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thank you, Tiffany. Always an honor to be on the show.
Now, this Daily Caller report highlights the Boston mayor, who's of Taiwanese descent, getting bankrolled by Gary Yu, who has ties to the United Front Work Department. This is a CCP overseas program and influence campaign. First, what's your reaction to all of this?
This is political warfare. They are bankrolling American politicians. And we call it unrestricted warfare, but the tip of the spear of unrestricted warfare is political warfare. And that's what's going on. That's how we get crazy local and state politicians that behave as if they are in the pocket of China, and they just may very well be.
For example, we did just see the recent indictment of Linda Sun, the aide to Governor Kathy Hochul, and also the previous Governor Cuomo. In terms of the indictment, it was saying how during the pandemic, she actually had the CCP on the phone with her during a secret New York meeting to talk about, what the city was going to do in response to the pandemic, and other examples of not letting Taiwanese officials meet in the city or, just not even letting them enter at all. Do you expect to see more such DOJ indictments come out?
I hope so. I hope to see it greatly accelerated. We need to make examples, eviscerate anything that looks or smells like a Chinese communist police station. We need to absolutely go destroy those. And we need to, the Chinese have gotten very good. As soon as we focus on one topic, they move to another financial scheme to buying off officials and corruption. They are very cagey and wily and rapidly moving.
Now, in terms of, these new fields, especially AI, we've seen the U.S. pouring billions of dollars into that. Now we have NVIDIA setting up supercomputers in the U.S. to the tune of about $500 billion as well. With, this latest directive, if you will, by the CCP official to someone like Gary Yu to bring back talent in that field to China, what do you see happening there? How can the U.S. safeguard that if it's being, stolen?
So this academia environment is just rich hunting ground for the Chinese communists. And we've got to make it very clear there will be a price to pay for academics who are not thinking through the entirety of what happens when you take money. Because you have to make statements when you apply for U.S. government grants from academia. And we found people lying. Well, if they're intentionally lying on these forms about taking money from a foreign power, boy, I have zero sympathy for them, because that clearly that is willful evasion and a willful intent to hide fact and truth.
John Mills, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Tiffany.
A push to restore American shipbuilding and counter China's dominance. The U.S. is planning to charge new port fees on Chinese ships. The fees apply to Chinese-owned and operated ships, as well as Western carriers that use ships made in China. The heavier the ship, the higher the fee. For a small vessel that weighs about 50,000 tons, the fee is well over $2 million per voyage, and the number set to increase over the next few years. Here are the details.
And they'll begin in about 6 months and will be rolled out in phases. The U.S. government says the fees could also be raised further in coming years. The Trump administration has recently embarked on a sweeping trade war with China and says these fees aim to revive American shipbuilding against China's dominance in the industry. China reacted to the news Friday, saying the plan will fail. It says they will raise global shipping costs and create inflation pressures on the U.S.
This comes after President Trump asked federal agencies to come up with plans to revive domestic shipbuilding. The president highlighted this issue earlier this month.
A single shipyard in China now produces more ships every year than all of the American shipyards combined. Think of that. And it was a business that we used to dominate. We used to dominate it totally. In short, chronic trade deficits are no longer merely an economic problem. They're a national emergency that threatens our security and our very way of life.
China controls half of global shipbuilding. U.S. shipyards have been in decline for decades. America used to build 70 ships per year in 1975. That number is down to just 5 ships annually now. The U.S.-China battle lines are hardening. Beijing stopped purchases of U.S. gas while discussing with Moscow to deepen energy cooperation. Those shifts reflect ongoing geopolitical fragmentation. According to the Financial Times, China stopped buying liquefied natural gas from the U.S. over 2 months ago. The American fuel source once made up 11% of China's imports at its peak in 2021. As of last year, the U.S. accounted for just 6% of China's natural gas imports. During the same period, Russia supplied China with 4 times more liquefied natural gas than the U.S., becoming China's third largest provider of the fuel after Australia and Qatar. China's vice premier met with Russia's energy minister Friday. The talks focused on expanding the flow of Russian energy to China, including new joint natural gas projects. And the shift extends to other fuel types. China is also slashing its oil imports from the U.S. and pivoting toward Canada instead. Meanwhile, European Council President Antonio Costa said phasing out Russian fossil fuel purchases would make room for American natural gas. Taiwan, too, announced plans to buy more LNG from the U.S. Analysts warn this energy shift is part of a broader Chinese regime strategy. The restructure would prioritize self-sufficiency to prepare for potential conflicts, whether that's taking over Taiwan by force or a direct confrontation with the U.S. The U.S. State Department is accusing a Chinese firm of directly supporting the Iran-backed Houthi terrorist group and attacking U.S. interests as a result. The State Department is calling it unacceptable. And earlier, the Financial Times cited U.S. officials as saying the company, which makes satellites, was supplying Houthi rebels with images to target U.S. warships and other vessels in the Red Sea. It said the company is linked to China's military.
We can confirm the reporting that Changguang Satellite Technology Company Limited is directly supporting Iran-backed Houthi terrorist attacks on U.S. interests. We urge our partners to judge the Chinese Communist Party and Chinese companies on their actions, not their empty words. Restoring freedom of navigation in the Red Sea is a priority to President Trump. The United States will not tolerate anyone providing support to foreign terrorist organizations such as the Houthis. China consistently attempts, as you know, to frame itself as a global peacemaker. And however, it is clear that Beijing and China-based companies provide key economic and technical support to regimes like Russia, North Korea, and Iran and its proxies. The CCP continues to enable these regimes, whether it be through the provision of dual-use items Russia needs to sustain its war in Ukraine, North Korea's ballistic missile development, or Iran's support of terrorism across the Middle East.
State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce said the assistance by the firm to the Houthis had continued even though the United States had engaged with Beijing on the issue. The spokesperson for China's Washington embassy said he was not familiar with the situation, so had no comment. The firm did not immediately respond to a request for comment.
Amid escalating trade tensions between China and the U.S., two Chinese e-commerce platforms are rapidly rising on U.S. soil. DHgate is currently ranked the #2 free iPhone app in the U.S. right now, while another Chinese platform, Taobao, just broke into the top 5 this week. Most U.S. buyers discovered these two apps recently through the Chinese-owned app TikTok. What's more, Chinese manufacturers are driving a new TikTok trend, urging Americans to buy products directly from their suppliers. The move is to bypass tariffs put in place by the White House. Let's dive in. Influencers claiming to be Chinese factory workers are flocking to TikTok. They're urging people to buy what they claim are luxury items from top brands straight from Chinese factories at a steep discount. Many of these videos are getting millions of views on a China-linked social media platform. It's unclear whether buying directly from them would sidestep U.S. tariffs. Meanwhile, TikTok is also facing a possible ban in the U.S. The app is fully owned by its Chinese parent company ByteDance, which is directly controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. U.S. officials say TikTok could be used as a Trojan horse to harvest American user data and push for narratives in line with the CCP propaganda. Some experts raise doubts about whether the products promoted by these Chinese factories are counterfeit. Experts point out that manufacturers usually sign confidentiality agreements with well-known brands and are not allowed to sell their products online. Coming up, the U.S. ambassador to Japan is sending a message. Washington and Japan need to align their focus to face an increasingly aggressive China. U.S. lawmakers from both parties reaffirming America's support for Taiwan.
Taiwan is engaging already with the administration. So I think it's been very clear that the administration is making this a priority.
And rising tensions between Ukraine and China. Ukraine slapping sanctions on 3 Chinese firms a day after President Zelenskyy said Beijing sent weapons to Russia.
I think it's important information. It's not very pleasant.
More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The new U.S. ambassador to Japan said the United States and Japan need to work together to align their defense forces against China. The new ambassador made the comment as he arrived in Tokyo.
This is so important at this point in time because we're coming to a Japan that is our most important ally. And as I got sworn in by Vice President Vance last week, he looked at the two of us and he said, you have quite a responsibility coming because you're going to go and serve to our most important ally in the most important region in the world at the most important time. We sit with Japan in a very tough neighborhood. I mean, you have Russia, you have China, you have North Korea. I mean, this is a pretty tough neighborhood to deal with.
Japan is home to the biggest overseas deployment of U.S. troops globally and hosts squadrons of fighter jets along with Washington's only forward deployed aircraft carrier strike group. Glass said Washington was focused on the safety of American and Japanese citizens and on making sure the military had all the support and materials it needed to counter threats from Beijing. In recent years, Tokyo has embarked on a historic military buildup and begun various projects with Washington to better align their forces and defense industries. Trump handpicked Glass to be ambassador partly due to his success in pushing back against China during his previous post as envoy to Portugal.
The U.S. is reaffirming its support for Taiwan's defense. 2 senators are in Taiwan Friday as part of an effort that crosses party lines.
The United States can continue something that began under the previous administration and is extending under this administration and has strong bipartisan support, which is connecting Taiwan, the Philippines, Japan, Australia, Korea, weaving together regional partners and allies.
I always, again, tell people, look past the rhetoric and look at the action. Secretary Hegseth came out here very early in this administration to talk about the importance of allies and what we're going to do to be able to support them. When you look at, for example, these trade negotiations, Taiwan is engaging already with the administration. So I think it's been very clear that the administration is making this a priority.
Senators Ricketts and Coons are speaking today with Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te, as well as Taiwan's defense minister and national security advisor. The visit comes amid high tariffs the Trump administration has imposed on Taiwan. Taiwan has given assurances that they are working to strike new trade and investment deals with the U.S. According to the senators, Taiwan also says it's investing fast to make their military stronger, nimbler, and less dependent on the U.S. Ricketts said Taiwan's leaders already had reached out to Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick for negotiations on President Trump's 32% tariffs.
Ukraine sanctioned 3 Chinese companies on Friday. This comes after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy announced on Thursday that Ukraine has intelligence that China is supplying artillery and gunpowder to Russia. He also accused China of producing weapons on Russian territory, but won't be providing any details until next week. Here's more.
I think it's important information. It's not very pleasant. We finally received information that China is supplying weapons to the Russian Federation, and we are ready to talk about it in detail. Today we have general information from the security service, from intelligence about gunpowder, artillery. And I think we will be able to talk about it in great detail next week, especially about the data that we believe shows that Chinese representatives are engaged in the production of some weapons on the territory of Russia.
The allegations are likely to upend relations between Kyiv and Beijing, already strained by Ukraine's earlier capture of Chinese nationals fighting for Russia. Ukraine has previously called on China to use its influence over Russia to push it towards peace.
Ukraine on Friday imposed sanctions on 3 Chinese companies. They banned these companies from doing business in Ukraine and freezes their assets there. Ukraine did not give further details. And that's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. Round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you soon.